My change was more than just a transformation. I prefer to refer to it as more of a metamorphosis. Many say I changed. However, it remains to me that I did not become someone new, just a greater version of my current self, like a butterfly. The caterpillar and the butterfly have always been one and the same. It is only the perception of it that changes. Really, only the thought changes its name. You could say thought depicts action. My metamorphosis happened first in my mind, and then it actualized on my body. Think about it. Nobody ever says, look at that caterpillar with wings.
I'm Rosalind, your life coach here at Alchemist One. And here we offer virtual and in-person products and services to address all things wellness for the mind, body, and spirit.
And together, we are fit to heal. Now, today we've got some special guests. One of our favorites is Brother Zumbi. And if you've watched our empowerment bookstore, we've got a phenomenal author, Miss Morgan. Hey, how you doing? So everybody, real quick. Yes, we can hear everybody. I love it. I love it. I love it. Phenomenal. You know, we always have some kinds of text issues at some point because technology is what it is.
Today we're
talking. That's right. We're talking about mental health in the Black community, which again revolves a lot around finance. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. What about you, Brother Zumbi?
One of.
Fair enough. So, like I said, for the show, we're talking about mental health in the Black community. Morgan, what's your standpoint on it?
So, you know, the greats say more money, more problems, right? And I do think that that statement is kind of used wrong. I think that the more money we have different problems. But I think the problems that come with not having financial freedom and not having financial stability are extremely demanding on your mental health. And so I think that the less money you have, the more problems you have, and the more money you have, some different problems come along with it.
Ooh. What say you, Brother Zumbi? Do you agree with that?
From a financial standpoint, I guess you would say there's two problems. Too little and too much. Most of us suffer from too little money. And I guess I'm going to talk more from a man's perspective. When he lacks the sufficient amount of resources to be an adequate producer, provider, and protector of his village, the psycho-spiritual effects on him, they're hard to put into words. But if you ever talk to a man who has been homeless or is homeless, his inability to provide shelter for himself, it does something to him. Okay. Because he lacks whatever resources are necessary to provide his own shelter. We're just talking just for himself, not family, but just for himself. And and just being able to acquire resources, it seems to be, for lack of a better term, a war in and of itself, particularly for African men. When you don't own and control uh, means of production, and you have to rely on other men to provide you with a check so you can take care of your family, it does something to you. It takes away from you as a man. It takes something away from you in terms of your sovereignty. Okay. So, like I said, that's just from a man's perspective.
Now, we talk about this a lot in terms of barriers. Morgan and I talked about this on the Empowerment Bookstore, and it was more of a cultural standpoint, the word you like to use, in terms of what our upbringing is, what we've seen, what we've been allowed to experience, or engage in experiencing. So you're saying as a black man, it's a lot different. And in raising sons, I can agree with you. I've never been a black man. I've only watched from the outside looking in. And it's been a traumatic experience, but different trauma for me watching these things happen to my brothers, whether they're biological or otherwise. So what are some barriers that we have that kind of lead to this?
Well, the number one barrier that must be acknowledged is racism, white imperialism, right off the bat. Okay. And, I'm going to take a little page from our ancestor, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. For those who may be familiar with her Cress theory of color confrontation and her classic read, The ISIS Papers, the one thing she always talks about is the man who poses the greatest threat to this system, mistakenly called racism, white supremacy, the greater the oppression. Okay. So if I can pose a threat to you in the boardroom, you're going to do anything and everything in your power to ensure that I can't act out what nature built me to be as a man.
Hmm.
Okay. Which is why, if you look in the in the animal kingdom, the one thing that you do if you're a male and you take over someone else's clan or pride or whatever, you make sure you eliminate the potential for the seeds to gain revenge. Okay. So it's like that old line in Bob Marley's "I Shot the Sheriff." Every time I plant a seed, to kill it before it grows. Okay. So you have to make sure that whoever poses a threat to your hegemony never reaches full maturity
Hmm.
to do that. And that includes, and that includes economics. Okay. And that includes being sane and, trying to be sane, African sane, in an insane incubator called America. Okay. That is a challenge in and of itself.
No, you're absolutely right. I believe it was James Baldwin who says to be Negro in America means to be somewhat frustrated or in anger at all times.
Mhm. Right. On some level, you are always enraged. You may not express it externally, but the rage is there. And so that's why when you are in a perpetual state of rage, you always have these escape hatches, whether it be Hennessy, whether it be the pipe, whether it be the church. It's like that Bob Deep song, "Drink Away the Pain."
Ooh.
Okay. So you are always given something to make you, as Malcolm would say, suffer peacefully.
Ooh, Maya Angelou is quoted the same. She says something to the regard of, if you don't speak up, they'll kill you and tell you you were proud about it. You were happy to go through it.
Mhm. Yeah.
I think it's also important to note that there's a constant competition,
Mm,
whether it be a Black man trying to compete to be considered equal with white men in the workplace or as business owners. And then there's also the competition of being a Black woman, and trying to compete with everybody,
right.
right? A Black man, a white woman, a white man, really being like the bottom of the totem pole. And especially in today's day and age, where we're really fighting to be seen as equals and fighting to be acknowledged as able to do just as much as everyone else. So that same feeling of being inferior or inadequacy with any type of setback or challenge still exists, while combating any types of pay gaps that exist, while combating any types of opportunity gaps that exist. And so I think it truly is a barrier that has to be recognized. And more importantly, it's a barrier where we have to educate each other on the resources to cope and deal with it, so that we don't revert to some of the things that were just mentioned.
I love it. But so you mentioned equal, right? Do you still believe equality or equity?
So whenever I think of equity, I think of an image that I studied when receiving my DEI certification from Cornell. And in this image, there is a fence, like a wooden picket fence. And there is a person that's trying to look over the fence. On one side, the person is tall enough to look over without any assistance. On the other side of the fence, the person is not tall enough to look over without assistance. And it shows a hole being cut in the fence. And that hole allows them to peep through, which we would consider to be okay. Now it's equal. We can see through. But equity is a step stool provided so that they can see through at the same perspective and at the same height as the person who's able to see over the fence without any assistance. And so I do think that equity is what comes into play, right? Where we are leveling the playing field for all parties to have the same opportunities. And that has to come at the sacrifice of some person, whether it be a person who looks like you or someone who does not.
Interesting. I like it. What say you, Brother Zumbi? Equity or equality?
It's really more of a case of power. Uh,
Mm,
the honorable Marcus Garvey would say that the only argument that satisfies man is power. You know, not love, not unity, not peace, but power. Having the ability to do for self, having the ability to defend self from others. So it's really a case of power, the powerful versus the powerless. Okay. So I think once you address the power issue, then the equality versus equity ultimately takes care of itself. But it really becomes a case of power. Do I have the ability to go and do for self without barriers? Or do I have the power to overcome those barriers uh, that are in front of me? Okay.
mm,
I'll give you an example. You know, one of my favorite movies is Harlem Nights, and there's a scene where the crooked cop Danny Aiello is in the office with Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy, and he's trying to figure out how is it that he, as a white cop, I'm tied into organized crime. You know, I'm tied into all this quote unquote power, but then when I see you two who are supposed to be the scum of the earth doing better than me, and I have all these connections, and I'm still living in a hovel. Okay, that tips the scale, because the brothers were able to figure out a way to navigate through the barriers and create a power base of their own.
Hmm.
Okay, so I've always said it's really a case of power.
I like it. And for those of you, we always drop books on every show. 48 Laws of Power is one that is a must read for everybody, because there are universal laws that dictate everything, regardless of what you may believe emotionally or otherwise. If you study those laws, you'll be able to maneuver throughout this world a lot better. So we talked a little bit about some of the barriers. Morgan, we talked a lot about the men. What about the women? What barriers have you found? Now I know your background is different. I know you look brown skinned, and a lot of people may assume trauma laden and blah blah blah, but that's not the case for you. But you still, because you live in this world, experience things.
Oh yeah,
What
I
what
think
have you
that every
gone through?
black and brown person experiences trauma, whether you grew up in poverty or not, may determine what some of that trauma looks like. But I don't think there is any black person in America who can say I grew up experiencing no trauma. For me, being the black girl at the white school, there is certainly trauma. Okay, being the only black face on the corporate team, trauma. All of those things come with experiences of battling that feeling of equal that we just talked about. But since we're taking the perspective of men as according to how they feel challenged is in this space, and women, from the woman's perspective, or from my perspective as a woman, it's always the battle to be able to say, well, I can do it too. Oh, you made six figures, we can do it too. But we do it with a different set of boundaries, or barriers that we have to overcome. And I think that it is truly one that's kind of overlooked. We know that a pay gap exists, but when we talk about power and how that comes into play, a lot of times women in power, especially black women in power, are viewed to be aggressive, bitchy, mean, taking everyone out in their path. And the same stigma can occur in entrepreneurship. But for men, it's that, oh, he has tenacity, he has courage, people listen to him, he's authoritative. An authoritative black woman is often seen as an aggressor. So I think those are some of the biggest barriers that we have to break as women, um, in especially black women. It is a challenge, and when we talk about recognizing barriers, until we recognize and acknowledge that those stigmas exist, we can't break that barrier down. Another that I find to be extremely impact that has a huge impact in our community, and sometimes isn't discussed as much, is this pretty privilege. I don't know how much you've talked about that on previous
Come on, speak
episodes.
on it.
Yes, as if it is a privilege to be a pretty woman, whatever that means, by the way, because who determines what this pretty is? Am I pretty? Maybe to somebody I am, and maybe to someone else I'm not. But it
That's right.
is it is a stigma that if you are considered to be an attractive woman, usually attractive to men who get to create this standard of pretty that exists, right? If you are pretty, then you have a privilege of accomplishing things easier than those who are not. And I think that's another barrier that, from a woman's perspective, we are faced with, that men do not so frequently have to combat, even though they do as well, but not so frequently.
Hmm. Girl, and when I met you, I was like, yo, I want to bring bougie back, because again, my life has been as such. We, as beautiful women, get talked down to a lot. A lot of us they try to humble us for being such a thing, so much that we're almost afraid to be our natural, beautiful selves, which then in turn makes us these shells, like fearful beings walking in the world like, oh my God, please don't look at me, please don't.
Yeah,
Talk to me. Please don't. I have nothing worth of value because now you've diminished my whole character to the blessing of this body that God has gave me. And now I can't run from it because I live in it.
correct. And it's this fine line that you have to balance. You don't want to be too pretty because then you're targeted, in so many ways. But then if you're not pretty enough, you're denied opportunities. What type of concept is this? And so, to the topic, when we talk about recognizing and breaking barriers, I don't think that we can break them without recognizing them. And we have to recognize that Black women face and combat this issue of pretty privilege far too frequently.
Correct.
And that we just have to diminish that mindset.
And it ends up being in any kind of way enslavement. What the brother was saying, what the sister was saying, we
Yes.
end up being mentally enslaved to either the money, the lack thereof money, the mentality, the stigma. How do we get over that? How do we cope with those things?
I, I I usually don't use the word cope. Um, my thing is, how do you, like I said, how do you overcome it? How do you get over it? How do you get around it? How do you get through it? Okay, because coping and victory to me are not synonymous. They don't mix. Okay, so I think for African people, you have to change the inner dialogue. Okay, the inner dialogue has to go from survival to living. It has to go from competing to, and I'm kind of using sports terminology with my background, from competing to dominating.
Hmm.
Okay. And like I said, I'll give you an example for me. Um, Having, played football, wrestling, track, there's a certain mentality that comes with each sport that you must possess. Okay. Part of the barriers that I've had to deal with, I've had to deal with other brothers who have had similar skill sets as mine. I've had to deal with other athletes who were, let's say, pharmaceutically enhanced
Hmm.
and having to overcome that. And when I faced that challenge, okay, I said, I knew that I wasn't going to rely on any pharmaceutical enhancement. So I had to take a different approach. How do I change the way I think, the way I train, the way I eat, the way I rest? And
Hmm.
so by gaining a better understanding of that, I was able to overcome, those other athletes, those other opponents, if you will, and those uh, who had the financial resources for their pharmaceutical enhancements couldn't understand how I was able to overcome what they had. You see, so it's really about, and I think the advantage that African people have always had, they've always historically have had a guerrilla mentality, and I mean GUERR gorilla. Okay, because we may not have the most sophisticated tools, okay, but we do have an indomitable spirit. Carl von Clausewitz in his book on war, he says human will is indefensible. So when you have an indomitable will to overcome, it's very difficult, damn near impossible, to beat a man who is determined to win. And I think African people have always historically have had that indomitable, indefensible human will to overcome. Okay.
I like it. The will to overcome. One will, your soul is your mind, body, your willpower to exceed wherever you're at mentally and to continue to go forward. It can also be considered, I think, courage, willpower, strength, motivation, discipline. Those are words that I would use to define it. But all are encapsulated, like you said in this book on war, by a mindset. So
A,
how do
a,
we
a
go ahead?
mindset and a spirit.
Ooh,
You see, there's everyone talks about mental toughness, but no one talks about spiritual toughness.
fair
Okay.
enough.
And what I mean by spiritual toughness, we always talk about if you have a pot of boiling water, if you stick a potato in it, it turns to mush. You stick an egg, it becomes hard boiled.
That's right.
So what has been within us that has been able to overcome the external pressures that have been put on us? It's like external forces, but yet there is an internal power that we possess to where we have always overcome.
Hmm.
What was it about a Madam C.J. Walker to overcome her humble beginnings in Louisiana post Civil War to become one of our first millionaires? Okay. What got a Maggie L. Walker to become the first female, not just black female, but the
Right.
first female
Female in
to
general.
own her own bank at the beginning of the 20th century? You see. So there is something within us, an internal, as Dick Gregory would say, an internal universal God force that has always kept us in some form of sanity to overcome this toxic incubator we've had to navigate since the fall of the Moors.
I like what you just said, the internal universal God force. Ooh. And like I said before, it's the spirit of the living God, depending on your denomination, your background, your personal belief. Call it what you want. Spirit, universe, God, Allah, whatever. That is the thing that I believe that Fit Goddess Tribe believes and supports, is the thing that, we're experiencing. We just put on this meat show to live on this earth, because just like if I go to space, I need a spacesuit. This is my earth suit.
Mm.
So you broke yourself free. Morgan broke herself free. I broke myself free. What three things can you both give to the people watching YouTube, Facebook Live to break from their own mental freedom, to that mental enslavement that they have?
I'd be happy to speak to that. I think that we as the Black community have to progress to the place where we accept mental health therapy is a part of our essential health care. Um, and that can come in many different forms and many different ways. There are a lot of people who believe that mental health therapy is opposite of religion, and that it is opposite of seeking therapy through God. And I absolutely do not agree with that. I have an amazing therapist who happens to be Christian just as I, and the therapy that she provides me is of the Christian faith. She provides me with scriptures to read. She provides me with resources that align with my beliefs. And that absolutely can exist in a healthy way. Many churches have mental health facilities and mental health resources within their church. I think that we have to break away from thinking that catering to your mental health is a privilege that we should not all have. I think just like we go to the dentist and we go to the doctor and get a physical exam, we should be taking care of our mental health as well with a professional. That is number
Prioritizing.
one.
I agree. What about you, brother?
I heard a metaphysical minister once said that there's nothing wrong with us, but something has happened to us. Okay. And I think, and really through no fault of our own, I think we have taken on the blaming the victim. Okay. There are things that are beyond us that are not our fault. Okay. But it is our responsibility to take care of our sanity, It is our responsibility. And I think one of the things that can be done is there must be periods of time where you are in complete silence.
Mm.
Okay. I think we've become addicted to noise, and we need time to be in complete silence. So that way we can mentally heal. I don't think we give ourselves enough time to just unplug and just be and be still, because that's, a lot of times, the best way I can describe it is many of us who have a spiritual life pray, but we don't meditate.
Oh,
Mm.
amen.
Okay. We're always praying to whatever entity you call it, but we never take the time to meditate and listen to the response.
Say that.
Okay.
Say that.
I'm guilty. I'm guilty because
So,
I will pray all day.
because we never take the time to listen to the response.
Hmm.
So I think having that quiet time that can allow us to heal, allow us to recharge, allow us to focus. You know, there have been studies done on meditation to where the benefits operate at not just a physical level, but the mental benefits, emotional, spiritual benefits. One of the benefits, I was talking with a former deputy chief of police here in Albany. I told him, I said, look, if you engage in meditation for 15 minutes a day over a 30-day period, you may be able to give up your high blood pressure medicine. He's like, what?
Mm.
I said, yeah. You know,
Ooh. So it's not just being silent, but it's also the practice of breathing and clearing your mind. So I pulled up this thing because I love silence. Like as a kid, I still think I love silence as a kid because I was always outside in nature. As an adult having children, I really understand what the old folks say now about the power of silence. Like, oh my, I don't have to listen to nothing. I don't have to hear anything. And this quote that I found from a Harvard Business Review, it says, being silent allows us to channel our energies. It gives us the clarity we need to calmly face challenges and uncertainty. The hour of silence, and if you are, again, depending on your demographic, your deities that you serve, they call it the power hour. Some people say I gotta go to my prayer corner for my power hour to sit in conversation, but both of you pointed out something very, very powerful in conversation, and we learn this amongst ourselves. Nobody actually knows how to listen.
There we go. You know what? I'm gonna keep it real because I know no other way to be. This is something that I truly struggle with. I
Hmm.
I do not want to sit in silence. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. I fill every single waking moment of my day with noise of some
Ooh.
sort. Like I will listen to music, I will have on a podcast, I will listen to an audiobook. I am always occupied.
Hmm.
And it's not even just physically listening to something, but even metaphorically. Like I'm never still. It's always something happening now. And like I said in response, I'll pray all day, but that stopping to listen part is a part of my spiritual journey that I'm still on.
Ooh.
Because when you stop to listen, sometimes you hear some things that you're not quite ready to hear, and it's hard. It's hard. You start hearing what you need to change. You start hearing, like we said, playing the victim, right? It's easy to
Hmm.
say these are all the outside forces that have made things challenging for me. These are all the outside forces that have made that the barriers, right, that we've recognized. But it's hard to stop and listen to more again. This is what you need to do differently. This is where
Ooh.
you need to pause. Did you handle this the right way? Did you sow into this person in this moment, or did you deflect? That's when you start hearing that feedback from God. And that's hard to hear.
Right.
So sometimes that silence is hard to get to.
And most people do. I mean, that's the whole thing of money and racism, right? We like every other race get a lot of money. We know that the black dollar is phenomenally, astronomically powerful. And yet, because we don't listen, it's hard for us to read, see, and hear. Our money just goes helter skelter. And then we often blame racism. Would you agree, brother?
Well, I wouldn't make it that simplistic. I
Okay, come on
think
with it.
I think we suffer a lot from ignorance in regards to what I call the science of beef, being business, economics, entrepreneurship, and finance. So it's not so much about racism as it is about the ignorance of the science of money. Okay. For those who subscribe to the Old Testament, if you read Proverbs 16, 17, 16, and I'm paraphrasing, it says, "What good is it for a man to get money if he lacks a desire to learn how to manage and master it?" Okay. Yeah, Proverbs 17 and 17, 16 is the verse. Okay. So I think uh, and one of the things I talk about when it comes to being a good manager, steward, master of money is your ability to develop systems and teams. Because this is how rich people think, and ultimately, this is how the universe thinks. This is how the universe is built. It's built on systems and teams. So, for example, every time I get paid, there's a system I have already set up about how that money is to be distributed once it comes into my account. Okay. Because when you develop systems and teams, it does one thing, it protects you from your emotions. Because the one thing I've learned in studying money over the years is that money is an emotional subject. And money has a way, money doesn't change you, but it will bring out what is inside of you. It doesn't change you, it reveals you.
Now let's talk about that because there's a lot of black people, especially within the church, that have this impoverished mindset that they feel like I must struggle, therefore I cannot have an abundance of wealth because that goes against God. That means that somehow in life I've faltered. If I have too much on this earth, I'm only supposed to suffer and wait until death.
It's
So
a con game. What did
mm,
Yeshua tell you? Yeshua came and says, "Look, I'm here to bring you life and to bring it more abundantly." He never mentioned the word poverty.
hmm,
Okay. So there's a con game that has been run, not just on African people when it comes to money and prosperity, but across the board. Okay. To where now you are, in fact, I can't remember what the verse is, but it's in the Bible where it says, "Curse not the rich." Okay.
But the evil,
Right. And
right?
our good ancestor Reverend Ike says, "Curse not the rich, because if you do, you guarantee you will never be one of us."
Yeah.
So you can't curse what you say you aspire to be.
ooh, Ecclesiastes 10:20. Don't badmouth your leaders, not even under your breath, and don't abuse your betters, even in the privacy of your home. Loose talk has a way of getting picked up and spread around. Little birds drop the crumbs of your gossip far and wide. Sheesh, you ain't never lied. It's like
Ain't
playing
never lied.
telephone. You know what I'm saying? You don't play telephone because you know whatever I said by the time it get to you is most likely not gonna be what I said.
Or
Uh,
just a little drop of it, just enough to cause a problem.
Correct, just enough to cause a problem. This is where we stop with the hearsay. This is where I tell my sons, hold on. You don't speak on your brother when he's not here. Go get him. And then y'all come and speak to each other in front of me. Hmm. So we talked about racism, money, enslavement. But what about money and segregation? Because Morgan and I both I went to a Catholic school. So I was for many, many years, 8 years, one of maybe at any given time, three black faces. And I remember, and now as I get older, the stigmas, the microaggressions, that's the word for it. I didn't know it then. The microaggressions were so heavy that they carried on at least until my late 20s. And some of it I'm just now identifying as, oh, snap, I didn't realize that too stopped me from doing this because of how you felt, not about me per se, but really about yourself. So in my case, it's Caucasian teachers telling me, oh, well, you shouldn't excel at this, even though in every other year I have math, science, physics, those sorts of things. Um, why are you drawing women? Women don't look like that, even though I was actually, hindsight, drawing myself. I see it now. When I look back at the drawing, I'm like, oh, that's me
That
grown
was
up.
me.
But so segregation, did it make it better with the money? Did it make it um because we talked about last show um all the famous places that got bombed. We got punished for success. So how do we deal with this?
I absolutely think that segregation has made the wealth gap even greater. Um, there was a study done. I don't know if you want to call it a study. I think it was a study, even though he implemented some comedy with it. But Killer Mike tried to spend only a black dollar. I think it was for 7 days. And it was the hardest thing ever. We don't have enough black resources in any community currently to only spend our money in black places. And I think that that is a product of desegregation. I think that integrating our communities have made it even harder for the black dollar to survive and remain to be black. I will give you an example.
Come on with it.
If you're living in a black neighborhood, do you think it's going to be easier for you or harder for you to keep your dollar black through 10 transactions versus if you are in a predominantly white neighborhood? Of course, it's going to be harder. That's not a trick question. If our communities were black, we would keep our black dollar black through more transactions. Um, the barriers to entry for us are higher to own businesses. In this area where we are, the 757, we talk about how difficult it is for a small business to obtain a simple business license in comparison to other places. That is a deterrent for people to own and operate legitimate businesses in this area. And for that reason, there's less places for you to spend your dollar and keep it black. So I do think that segregation is one of the worst things that has happened to the retention of the black dollar. I think that desegregation has caused for us to have even more of a challenge to keep the black dollar powerful.
Hmm. Sheesh. And what I heard you talk about was redlining, and they've done it amongst
Yeah.
everything: school districts, housing complex, community food. You know what I'm saying? They even did it here in Virginia. Uh,
Yeah.
they started shutting down some of the best health food stores and started creating food deserts to where now in communities, it's a black community easily because there's going to be what? You can call it out. What do you think is going to be in the community? A liquor store, a lottery place, a cash checking place, and tons of junk food.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it in Norfolk, Virginia, here in the past 2 years, post pandemic. There started to be a bunch of black owned lounges, bars, restaurants. I wouldn't say necessarily nightclubs because that might take it a bit far. Opening near and on Granby Street. The city of Norfolk changed the ABC laws and made there to be so much red tape to jump through that many of those black owned businesses ended up closing. in their infancy because they could not keep up. Now, I will be honest and say that some white-owned businesses closed as well, but not nearly as many. And this is just yet another example of redlining and how it impacts business ownership. And at the end of the day, that impacts our money, our Black dollar.
That's right.
And so those redlining practices absolutely still exist. And they are a barrier and they are a hurdle. And I do think that desegregated and integrated communities cause that problem to be even more prevalent and even more of a challenge.
Mm. I'm looking up the quote. Uh, most it's interesting how a lot of people will talk about Martin Luther King in such high regards when he was living. That was not the same.
Right.
I remember specifically before integration happened, Martin Luther King said, and I quote, "Until we commit ourselves to ensuring the underclass is given justice and opportunity, we will continue to perpetuate the anger and violence that tears the soul of this nation. I fear I am integrating my people into a burning house." Now the house is on fire. Like I always say, the world is on fire. And like, what do we do? So Zilby, he's written a book. Morgan, you may not have known. He's going to be on the show too. He's written a book to help
I
us.
saw the goat, the goat.
That's right. That's right. So Zumbi, this is my time in the show to tell you again, what can we do to be or get back as a community? I know you have come on, tell us your pillars again. How can we get back to basics, I guess?
I guess the first thing is let's start with your self economics first. Okay. We always want to talk about the group economics, but let's focus on getting your self economics or your own personal economy first. Let's start with the 10% solution, which is a dime out of every dollar is yours to keep. Okay. Because we need to activate what's called the law of magnetism. Whereas the more money you save and accumulate, the more you will attract. And as you attract it now, you must give that money an assignment or a job. Okay. So accumulate the resources and then put the resources to work. I know I'm talking simplistically for the sake of time, but it all begins with start with your personal economy. You know, a dime out of every dollar is yours to keep. That's very simple. Okay. Acquire resources. And as you acquire the resources, give the resources a job so then the resources will begin working for you. I know I mentioned this book earlier in a previous show called The Money Code. Okay. And in that book, it actually gives a blueprint to where if you are employed right now, you are to give yourself no more than a 10-year window to straddle yourself off the job to where you are financially free and economically independent. Okay. So if you pick up the book, The Money Code, you will see that blueprint in there for you to follow.
Ooh.
Love it.
Okay.
Now, Morgan, you two have jumped off because he just said a 10-year plan to get out of corporate America and have your own finances to, you know, support your lifestyle. You did that in less than 10 years, right?
I did, yes.
So
Uh,
what advice can you give to the people?
the advice that I give is that we have to be strategic. My dad always makes this statement that you young, it's not time for you to eat your cake. Wait on it. Spend conservatively while you have that guaranteed income from whatever job it is that you worked super hard to get, as I know that you have. Um, Put it away for you to be able to invest in a business or invest in anything that's going to feed you so that you can have that financial freedom. Many of us are working way too long to get to a point where we really can't even afford retirement truly. You know, what does your plan for yourself look like? Have you purchased any real estate in those years that you're in a corporate environment to make it your retirement plan? I say it to my husband all the time. I purchased my first property when I was 22 years old. I actually closed on that house on my 22nd birthday. That house is my retirement plan. That house will be well paid off by the time I am ready to retire. And if I don't want to live in it, which I don't, but if I don't want to live in it, I can rent it out and make enough money for myself to live off of in my home that is also paid off by that time too. You know what I'm saying? We have to plan. We have to put strategy in place that allows us to have the financial freedom when we do reach those goals and opportunities. The first thing that we do cannot be to fill up the wall with white people's names on it. We got
As
to
she
pay
should.
ourselves first. Now,
That's
don't
right.
get me wrong. I'm gonna go ahead and get my shoe with the white man's name on the bottom of it because I like the shoe. So I'm not gonna sit here and flex in front on you. But I'm gonna pay myself first by sowing seeds into my own life so that I can be free before I give all of my money to someone else's financial freedom.
Correct. Correct. And since we're talking about it, we got a shout out to HR Green Book. If you're not in the Green Book, right, go to hrgreenbook.com. This is a
Okay.
shameless plug, right? If you're looking for any black owned business, right, any black owned business, whatever you can think of off the top of your mind, check there first, right? And if they're not there, tell them to go there and register and get on the site so that we can find you, right? It's that time. It's that time now that we collectively, as a group of people, need to say, hey, I support you. We need to go the extra mile for one another to search out and find, to make our presence known and show, hey, I'm here. I exist. I have the knowledge. If you're looking how to jump out of the corporate ladder, Morgan's your girl. She can tell you everything that she's gone through. She can tell you, that is what I tell my kids. The only way to shortcut life is to learn from other people's mistakes. You don't have time. We no longer have the time. Even if you feel like you have the time, you do not have the time anymore to just keep making nonsensical mistakes when there's nothing new in the world. Um, and of course, once you've got that courage and that willpower, then you can go and get Minister Zumbi's book and sit down and annotate and really figure out your strategy, right? Morgan will give you the confidence to be like, hey, I can do this
Let's do it.
and create the plan. Minister Zumbi's got the book to help you organize, because that's a chapter in your book, right? Order steps.
It is.
Yep. He's got the platform to order your steps even further. Now, we've talked about racism. We've talked about, and it's so cool that I'm not the only one of the thought that integration was not the best thing for us.
No.
Well, let's call it a more accurate term.
Okay.
Okay. It wasn't a civil rights movement, it was a consumer rights movement.
Oh man.
Okay. And it wasn't integration, it was more of a silent hostile takeover.
Mm.
All right.
Mm.
Because and I'm using history as an example. Okay. During that whole segregation and Jim Crow, we learned one thing that we could actually do for ourselves. And I use Negro League Baseball as an example. All right. That whole thing when Branch Rickey came and took Jackie Robinson out of Negro Leagues had nothing to do with social justice. That was about the destruction of an independent Black economic power base. Because what they learned was two things. Number one, Negro League Baseball, 20% of its fan base was white. Number two, they were more international than Major League Baseball. They were barnstorming all throughout Latin America. That's how we got our brother Roberto Clemente. Okay. And he came through the Negro Leagues. I can show you a picture with him, Hank Aaron, and Willie Mays in the Negro Leagues before they all went to the majors, respectively. Okay. And then you saw the dismantling. So it was really more of an acquisition
Mm.
because of the economics. They said, okay, you want to come up in our world, fine, but you're not bringing that economic power base with you. So we got diluted as that took place. Okay.
Ooh, diluted versus integrated. I kind of like that.
I like it
So
too.
so we got diluted. Look at our HBCU football players. Okay. So once you started and you really saw the dismantling of it by 1970, okay, when we were no longer going to Alabama A&M. It was
Mhm.
Alabama and Auburn. It was no longer Grambling and Southern. It became LSU. It was no longer FAM. It was no longer Bethune-Cookman. It became Miami, Florida State, University of Florida. Okay. And so now all of that talent is now locked up in Power Five conferences, not just football, but basketball and other sports as well. Okay. And I always hear people says, well, we need to, I said, look, I'm not going to ask an athlete to sacrifice his athletic career for what? Okay. Especially with the condition that the HBCUs are in now due to incompetence, corruption. I can't ask an athlete to sacrifice his career when I know all that other stuff is going on. Okay.
Right, because that's his only way of source of income. Like you said in the beginning, if this is his mental bread and butter that allows him to feel human, how dare I take the one last inkling of humanity
And the
from
other
him?
thing is this: if we're talking about producing quote unquote culturally conscious or African centered athletes, that has to begin in the womb. We can't wait until the money shows up. By then, it's too late.
That's
Right.
right.
And
Okay.
I would say that's not just with athletes, that's with anything.
Mhm.
Right.
You know, we can't expect everybody to I always make a statement. I hope the beehive doesn't sting me. But I am not a Beyonce fan. I talk about it on my podcast, Seriously
Mhm.
CEO. Um, you can't wait until you're a billionaire and then say I like my baby hair with baby hairs and afros, but you've been wearing blonde lace fronts your entire career. You
Oh,
you you
snap.
can't you can't wait that long to like now we want to wake up and now we want to be
Mhm.
woke and now we want that. It doesn't work like that. And I love the way that you put it, brother, is to cultivate that from the womb and teach our children, so that we're not playing catch up when it is that we do make it.
That's right.
Mhm.
And on the sidelines, just to inform the audience, I've been showing you, he mentioned Jim Crow, and I wanted to show you the error in which he was speaking of, and just a little bit of what was going on in that timeline. Now, one of the things that I really, really like to highlight in the Jim Crow era, it goes back to the soul of Black people, right? Through all of this, right? The murders, the heydays, this happens. Harlem
Mhm.
Renaissance,
Right.
where we buck completely on the system and we're like, oh my God, you want to see how great a people are? Let me show you. You can take away everything. And that's my our brand's major mission is to, like you say, cultivate it from the womb. But for those that didn't get it from the womb, we're trying to bring it to you now live and in person, to a platform that you can get very simply, YouTube, that you can share, just to be like, hey, somebody that looked like me told me I'm great. I deserve this. I deserve the work, the time, the effort that goes into all of this, the patience and everything, the discipline, the mindset, and transforming it, because that's the people that we come from. This show, Fit to Heal, is just a constant reminder that we are these people. I may not be Annie Allen, but I might look like her. And because I look like her, I have to remember that some part of her lives within me, that soul that he spoke of in the beginning. So we're coming close to time. I think we covered all the topics. We talked about segregation and money. We talked about racism and money, right? The biggest thing was the mental health in the Black community. One, just breaking down the barriers. We talked about a whole lot of different stigmas that are either placed on us or we place on ourselves. Either way, we accept them. Like the sister Morgan said, once we acknowledge, right, acknowledgement is key. Once we acknowledge
Yeah.
that they exist, we can talk about the elephant in the room and begin to break it down and replace it. Again, now I'm gonna let you two shout yourselves out real quick. Ladies first. Yes, tell us where we can find you, and a little bit about how you can help the people, because you said you have your own podcast too. Let's hit it.
Absolutely. So I can help the people in many different ways. I am a business coach. I am a motivational speaker. I am an author and a podcaster. My information can be found on www.thelusobrand.com. That's spelled Lusso, thelusobrand.com. And you're able to access all of my services there, whether it be business coaching or purchasing an episode of my book, Leap Off the Ladder, or checking out my podcast or asking me to guest on one of yours, speaking to an organization, whatever it may be, all there on my website. You can also follow me on Instagram at Lusso CEO. That's LUSSO CEO.
I love it. I love it. And she's so beautiful.
Well, thank you.
Don't you want this power female sitting across from you telling you what to do? Again, you talked in the beginning about how a lot of people will stigmatize black women, be like, oh my gosh, she's bossy and she's aggressive. But I like the word delegator and disciplined and consistent and proficient way better. She's poised. Look at this. I'm sorry, sis. This suit is phenomenal. Okay,
Thank you.
before I gush too much, because I get onto a whole nother sidetrack. Come on, brother Zumbi, tell us who you are, where we can find you, and how you can help the people.
I'll start off by saying I'm a servant of African people. You can find my book in your melanated bookstore or via Amazon. You can, and I'm still working my way into the 21st century, so I don't have all the social media accoutrements as of yet. You can call me at area code 518 512 9972. My email for the moment is libertyhallpress at gmail.com. I am a business thought leader. I have developed business models, business plans, have been an advisor to businesses. As mentioned before, I have gone into the publishing arena by publishing my first of many books. And one thing that I wanted to mention, to put it in the record, another barrier that we have to also get over is the epigenetics. And here's what I mean. Ida B. Wells Barnett, who actually had her own uh, newsletter, did some research and discovered that of all the black folks who got lynched in America, over 80% of them were business owners and entrepreneurs. Okay.
Sheesh.
So when we look at that, what has been the multi-generational ramifications of that? You know,
Mm.
is it something within us to where if we try to build something, is there an epigenetic fear that someone will come and tear it down, i.e., Tulsa, Rosewood, Durham, or any of the other, what I would like to call quilombos that existed during the early part of the 20th century? So I think there's an epigenetic barrier that we must overcome to say that if we build something, we also know how to protect it.
Amen.
Correct. Correct. It cannot just be if you build it, they will come. Because as I showed really quickly, buck breaking, right? If you've ever read the Willie Lynch theory, the letter, it is a scientific method in which they have produced these results that would last centuries if we allow them mentally. So what the brother said was real, real deep. We have to be willing to release that victim mentality that somebody, the man or whoever you want to call it, is going to come and get you. Because the beauty, and I'm gonna find the picture, the beauty is if we collectively stand up together next to each other, like the song said, lean on me, right? We'll all be stronger for it.
Mm.
So now I guess I get to do mine. Yes. Hold on. I'm going to put myself up here. Hey, hey guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. You have been listening to our broadcast, Fit to Heal, and we tune in every Monday at 7:15, where we bring on phenomenal people in our community, local and near and far, to discuss how we can change, not only change, but transform ourselves mentally, physically, and emotionally. We hope that you will be here again next Monday. Don't forget to share this link. We were live today, but it's still showing on YouTube and Facebook. Please get the message, pass the message, spread the word, and don't forget when you watch the show, have your notebook because we've always dropping books. We're always dropping knowledge. I hope to see you again soon, and we'll check you again next week. Peace.